Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Don't Go with the Flow, a podcast that raises awareness about period poverty and addresses the bias and stereotypes associated with menstruation. I'm your host, Ahana, and today we have Miss Laila Abed with us. Laila is an undergraduate student at Columbia and a National Youth Advisory Council member of Period, a nonprofit that we will be talking about today. She is also the founder of the Sacramento chapter of Period. Laila, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, so excited to be here and talk with you guys.
So, could you share a little bit about Period, what it is and what it does, and just share the importance of its work with our members?
For sure. Period Inc. is a global youth-fueled nonprofit working to eradicate period poverty and stigma through three pillars, advocacy, education, and service. We really try to ground all of our work in those three pillars. Our work kind of ranges from a few things, but Period annually distributes millions of menstrual products. We work on menstrual health curriculum, and we equip young leaders like myself before I joined to advocate for menstrual equity policies such as the repeal of the tampon tax and mandating period products in public spaces, shelters, schools, prisons, etc. Period actually was originally founded in 2014, so it's our 10-year anniversary since we just started 2025. And it started by two high school students in Portland, Oregon, actually, and since then has grown to hundreds of chapters, volunteers around the globe, one of which is mine, and a couple of others that I helped start. We also have served over 6 million menstrual cycles since we've started. We estimate that one cycle kind of consists of 15 period products. So if we do the math, it's probably almost to, I think, 100 million products since we've started. But it's been really great. At its core, Period is really just about fighting for a world where menstrual health is a right and not a privilege. And we do that through a lot of different ways.
Wow, that's amazing. And I wanted to ask you personally, how did you become involved? Did you have a personal experience with the taboo of menstruation that drove you to fight against it? Because I know that I started this platform for a reason, and that was because I personally experienced menstruation stigma and I wanted to do something about it. So I was just wondering if you had any personal story that drove you to become part of Period.
Yeah, so I got involved with Period in 2021. That's when I started the Sacramento, California chapter of Period. And then now I serve on the Youth Advisory Council. And then just recently, I was elected to serve on the national board. So kind of had a long
Congratulations.
journey of experiences. But the reason why I got started was Period was actually when I was around 14. I'm 19 now, so it's been a while. But I also encountered challenges talking about menstruation at my school, which was an Islamic school. I went to from kindergarten to senior year. There was a big taboo, mostly because of cultural misconceptions,
Right.
that those in my Muslim community suffered because of it. So I was really angered by that. I was frustrated. I was like, we don't have period products. We have to go to the office and we have to kind of have all these conversations with our teachers, and no one was really welcoming conversation about it. And I felt like I
Right.
was the only one who was like, why do I care about this? Nobody else does. So after that, I proposed free sanitary pads in our school restrooms, and we had a lot of resistance from that. And some of my friends, some people at my school used to call me the period girl. It was more so like a big joke kind of thing. Nobody really thought that, okay, what she's doing is serious. This is just
Right.
kind of like a phase I felt that like I was going through and I was just trying to do something. We also didn't have a health course. We didn't have any kinds of classes that other public schools have. So
Yeah.
I felt like it was just a really big gap that we were missing. So after that, a lot of the things that I was trying to do was try to have, conversations, try to start something with my administration. So gradually I had a lot of conversations. Some of the members of my chapter were also part of the school. So we
Mhm.
had a lot of meetings with my administration. We talked about why we wanted to do things. We were trying to focus on health. We wanted to have workshops. And we also focused a lot on just having boys and girls in the conversation because
Right.
they kind of wanted us to gear all of our work towards okay, you can talk to the girls, but I don't really want to have guys in the conversation because it doesn't really matter and it doesn't influence them. And I was like, well, it does. So
Yeah.
after a lot of work with that, which it took, I think I want to say maybe 2 years for us to actually have well, I wanted to install period pad dispensers in my school. So that took around 2 years just of funding. But kind of, I'd say, even a few months into having those conversations, we had workshops at the school. We were able to
Yeah.
kind of create projects, and we also had boys in all of our conversations. So I was happy about that. So now we've grown a lot after 4 years. I think we raised over 6K now. We've partnered with over 25 organizations around the nation and globally. We just hit actually 30,000 menstrual products to schools and nonprofits.
Yeah.
Worked a lot in advocating for policies like the Menstrual Equity for All Act of 2021, which is when I first started. So I just like to think about it as achieving period-friendly restrooms, sustainable menstrual products, accessible sanitation facilities, and reproductive health workshops, which I think I focused a lot on in the beginning. So that's
Yeah.
just how I grow our movement personally, but all of it together is just a collaborative effort, and you can't do it by yourself, which I've learned a lot the
Yeah.
hard way.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think what you said about, having cultural values kind of interfere, or at least they play a big role in like defining how you think about these topics, especially how, society perceives menstruation to be. And a lot of it is culturally influenced. And I know because I'm Hindu, but in India actually, like, menstruation is also considered a taboo, which is very interesting because, like, if you're on your period per se, they don't let you enter the kitchen, or, they don't even give you hygienic like products to use for your period. And this happens in the rural areas, especially. So when you were talking about, raising awareness in your Islamic school, I was just wondering, like, how do those like global comparisons and how do those like intersectional influences kind of like affect people's attitude about talking about it publicly? Because putting in pad dispensers and giving people the resources is great. And does that really drive people to talk about it publicly? Like, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of the conversation international and globally versus in the US is very, very different. Even me, I've
Yeah.
learned a lot, and there's a lot of things that I like wasn't aware of. And I was like, in the US, it's very, very different in terms of like policy. The education is a lot more structured than it would be in a lot of different organizations. I'm not too familiar with a lot of them. I've done research a little bit on I want to say Nairobi, and then
Yeah.
also done work with Uganda. And I think that was my first experience that I was like, oh, okay, there's a lot of differences in terms of culture. A lot of people in different areas will use different kinds of pads. They don't have access to
Hmm.
tampons. For me, I personally don't use tampons. And I know a lot of other Muslims don't use tampons. So that was like also a big thing that my school was like, we don't really want to talk about tampons. We don't
Right.
really have tampons in the bathrooms, which I was like, that's fine with me. Like, as long as people have their products they need, and like that's how we start. Versus other communities may not want pads because they're not as comfortable, or some
Right.
people want to wear period underwear. So it's very, very different in terms of like community by community.
Yeah.
So that's also how I guess it can get tricky, because also at period, whenever we reach out to organizations, organizations reach out to us, I'll always ask them, does your community prefer tampons? Do they prefer
Mhm.
pads? Do they prefer menstrual cups? And a lot of them so far I've gotten are mostly pads, just because it's the most standard and it's the easiest to say that people will use them versus tampons may go unused. So that's
Yeah.
kind of what I go off of, but it's definitely something that I think needs to be explored a lot more in different countries.
Yeah.
US starts to have a lot.
Yeah, no, and that's really interesting that you bring it up because I never really, until now, have really thought about, oh, okay, because people have different preferences, like pads, cups, tampons. It's really interesting that, there's different resources available for different communities. And I think that definitely should be publicized more. Which brings me to my next question. What is menstrual equity and why should we care? We were talking about the different cultural values and the different influences. So, how does this affect menstruation and the topic of it in general? And why should we care? Why is it important?
Yeah, so menstrual equity, people a lot of times get confused menstrual equity and then period poverty. So period poverty is more just like, not having access to menstrual products, not having access to, and it's not just products, it's having access to bathrooms, that has access to water, waste management,
Yeah.
access to the knowledge, the curriculum, to know how to take care of yourself. And then on the other side, there's menstrual equity, which is having affordable, accessible, and safe menstrual products for all kinds of people, all menstruators. That includes laws, policies that really acknowledge and consider menstruation. Another thing is that on any given day, the statistic is 800 million people around the world are menstruating, which in
Mhm.
total, an estimated 500 million people lack access to menstrual products and adequate facilities for menstrual hygiene management, which is a huge percentage that everyone
Yeah,
is like, it's not really a big issue. Not a lot of people deal with this, and that's globally, that's to a lot of different extents, it's in different countries. So I think really it's important because periods really shouldn't hold anyone back from attending school, going to work, participating in society. Lack of access to products creates barriers a lot to education and employment, especially to marginalized communities. That also plays a big role in terms of statistics and different kinds of communities, different races, who is it affecting more, women especially as well. And I think just caring about menstrual equity means caring about dignity and human rights. It's not so much just like, oh, this is a privilege, this is something luxury that people can
yeah,
have. It's not really that necessary. For me, I often tell men who like if we'll have an in-person distribution and they're like, oh, this I don't need a pack of like period products. I don't need this or this doesn't involve me.
yeah,
I try to reel them back in and I'm like, think about your mom, think about if you have a wife, think about your partner, think about your daughter, if you have one, and
yeah,
even female friends. It doesn't have to necessarily be someone super close to you, but that sometimes gets people to think about the impact of menstrual equity, not really directly affecting them in the way that people think, but it still
right.
impacts people in some way. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well. They don't want to talk.
Yeah, yeah,
It's somewhere to start. So I've learned that addressing cultural stigmas is very particular, and you have to be very careful about who you're speaking with and what you say. Kind of like you mentioned, especially when it comes to religion, to gain support, sometimes you have to emphasize menstrual health and hygiene rather than focusing on what is a period, what is the biological process, why is it relevant. Nobody
right.
wants to hear that sometimes, which I'm not saying it's necessarily right, but it's a starting point, and I think that's where you kind of have to start with that. And then, even with that being said, you can kind of make strides and bridge those gaps by focusing on the health and dignity of people. So, for me, it's not really just about providing products, it's really about reshaping conversations, trying to talk about the shame associated with it, how
Yeah,
to foster empowerment, and just raising awareness in general. Because when you tackle stigma, you can also open doors for education and economic opportunities, just making sure that everyone really feels welcome in the conversation. You're able to tackle a lot of different challenges versus just one or the other, which I think is super important depending on who
yeah.
you're speaking with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you were talking about is like also the fact that people might just assume that because we're talking about periods and menstruation, it's limited to one demographic only. And why should other people be part of that conversation? And when I talk about demographic, I am talking between men and women. A lot of that times that discernment is between gender because, a woman menstruates, but a man doesn't. And that's, I think, a divide that like people are still not ready to completely address publicly, even though, we're making strides, like you said, it still exists. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think people are ashamed to address menstruation and how does it affect the younger generation? Because me personally, when we were growing up, I remember in fifth grade that we used to have like a health ed or a special ed or sorry, health ed class second semester, and it would like divide the boys and girls into two separate classrooms, and the girls would learn about periods, the boys would learn, about their hormones and whatever in their body and puberty, but we would never really like exchange our thoughts or our views on this. Even in middle school, I remember like one of my friends, she has really really painful periods, and she wasn't able to run the mile in physical education that day, and she told the teacher about it, and the teacher was like, well, you got to suck it up because everyone's on their period and you don't want me to disturb, our male PE teachers with this problem of yours because, it's not relevant to them. So why should they know? And why do they want to be grossed out by your problem? So, that kind of affected me because I was like, is it really a problem and is it really something to be grossed out about? So I wanted to know your take on it, and I wanted to know this attitude and this interaction and this engagement that we see in our teachers and that we see in our school environments and our home environments. How does it affect the younger generation? And how, also more specifically, how is period combating this issue?
Yeah, it's actually interesting you say that because I wrote an article for the Period Rag a little while ago and I talked about very similar experience in fifth grade where we also had like a conversation. It was just a one-time thing. It was a
Yeah,
conversation And by the end of it, we got like a little period kit, and it was like some pads or something. And
Yeah.
then they're like, make sure you hide this in your backpack. Don't show it to anyone. Don't take it out. And I was like, oh, this is like my life. Like, what is going
Yeah.
on? Like, why
Yeah.
are we so secretive about this? And
Yeah.
that was it. That was like the only conversation we had. And we were also split. I'm not even sure if the guys got like a similar conversation or whatever, but I agree. I think it's super important, especially now as I'm growing, that it's really important for both menstruators, non-menstruators, and everything to know how is that person feeling, what are the hormones going through. Sometimes I'll be talking with my friends at school and I'll be explaining, well, these are the menstrual cycle phases, and they're like, I thought it's just you have a period and like that's it. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
this and
Completely.
there's this. There's a lot that goes into it. So to answer your question, I guess more explicitly, but I think it's really deeply rooted, one in cultural taboos, but I think that's only a part of it. And I think sometimes that can be in very specific households. But I also think really it's misinformation and a lack of education. Because, like you said, many people grow up thinking periods are dirty, they're embarrassing, the blood is gross, nobody wants to see the blood. And a lot of girls get worried, like, I'm going to be at school, I'm going to like stand up and I'm going to have a stain, and that's going to be so
Hmm.
awkward.
Yeah.
So I think that's really what perpetuates the silence. And then that just kind of keeps going on. It prevents young people from asking questions, seeking help, feeling confident, even because at a young age, you don't know that when you're on your period, maybe you're bloating, maybe your face is
Right.
puffier. You feel like, why am I so ugly like right now on this stage? And
Yeah.
it feels so weird. So I think the education system sadly neglects period education. And recent studies, have even come out, one by even Colombia, finding out that tampons contain like harmful chemicals like lead or arsenic. And that becomes a whole other issue because it's terrifying for young girls and women. I was just at the grocery store and a lady was by me and she was like, we were having a conversation about what's in our pads and
Yeah.
tampons. And we're like, we don't know what's healthy, we don't know what's safe to
Right.
use. So I think now it's grown a lot because people are now, or companies are coming out with very organic products. So now
Yeah.
people feel a little bit more safer in terms of what they're using. And I think that that's kind of supporting the education, but there's still a long way to go. I think Period specifically combats this because they promote education programs, hosting workshops, they use social media, which is really important, especially for our younger generation now,
Hmm.
beyond policy. Period also, we do a lot of training, the next generation of leaders with the skills they need to advocate for real change.
Yeah.
Have a Period community organizer program. We have media training, which I've been going through. And then we also have an Activate Your Advocacy boot camp with a lot of different organizations. So I think all that is super helpful because the youth now have resources and education to use themselves, although they kind of have to find it or look online rather than it just being there for them. For me personally, I've done a lot of seminars at universities and schools, trying to educate people on what menstrual health is, what is a menstrual cycle, how can we empower participants in these workshops to advocate for safer products and policies. Because
Yeah.
it's not only that I want to share, like, this is what a period is and this is what we do. It's more like, okay, what is the first step you can take to kind of get involved or for how can you help? So I think for that reason, we're able to build like a lot more informed, confident, and vocal generation, which we've seen in a lot of different ways. But I think it's also really cool because Period addresses an immediate need by distributing menstrual products to
Right.
those that who need them. So we involve partners who fund our network. We have a lot of sustainability programs. I think it was 2019 when Period created National Period Day, which now I think the year after during COVID, it was renamed Period Action Day, which is recognized as like the global impact of the menstrual movement. And that same year, I think it was, well, 2024, I led a campaign in New York since I've moved since then, to
Yeah.
distribute period kits, gather signatures for the Stamp Act of 2024. So we're stopping taxing menstrual products and just also raising funds for our programming and menstrual equity initiatives. So I think that day specifically, Period Action Day, has been a really great way that we've kind of evolved over time. And
Mhm.
now we've gotten a lot more support, especially on that day to get people involved,
Yeah.
both in the community, but also just other schools or workplaces who kind of want to sign off and be more involved in the work we do, which I think is really great.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And it's funny that you also talk about social media affecting, what we share with the younger generation. And that's something that I wanted to talk about. But I had a question before. When you mentioned teaching curriculum, period establishes that teaching curriculum and conduct seminars, or, do you distribute that curriculum to schools, or how do people have access to that curriculum?
Yeah, so we have a lot of online curriculums. Some of them are educational based. Some of them are like we've done a periods in prison curriculum. We've done sustainable menstrual products, I think around Earth Day. And then now our kind of website is getting a little bit more revamped with a lot of different resources. Most of it is on our website, so it's not necessarily us distributing, I guess, like materials to
Okay.
schools. A lot of times we have chapters who will partner with a school and will go and have like a slideshow or like a PowerPoint, which is created by people from Period. It's created by a bunch of our partners, Real Research, because Period doesn't necessarily conduct research necessarily on their own because of the resources we have. And obviously, we want, correct sources that are getting out there,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to statistics and things like that. Although
Yeah.
we do that with different ways. I just wouldn't say necessarily specific research,
Yeah.
but we partner with a lot of organizations to do that. And I have resources and slides that we've created in the past or that I'll edit kind of depending on the community I'm working with. Like
Right.
I've recently done one at Pace University and I focused on what we already teach in terms of educational curriculum, but then I also wanted to talk more about specifically policies in New York and how people can kind of get more involved in that.
Yeah.
So usually after that, a lot of the professors, the teachers will request, can I have the slides or can you share the links you had or the
Yeah.
books you posted on the slideshow? And then we'll share those with whoever the people that we're working with and they distribute it to the kids or they'll have it kind of kept like that. So I found that was super helpful because also when
Okay.
it's digital, it's a lot easier to kind of keep together.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I wanted to go back to that social media aspect we were talking about when it comes to talking and addressing about menstruation. I like specifically think that social media itself has played a huge role in like creating the environment to address menstruation in a certain way. Like, I think periods are associated with, oh, she's moody that day, or she's not feeling it, or it's that time of the month. And I think those type of things have kind of made it a very like joke like atmosphere, and it's not serious enough that no, like this is a serious problem. Like people can pass out when they're on their periods. Like people need painkillers. Like it's a proper problem, and I think sometimes we try to joke about it, but you just end up, diluting the situation and not giving it enough importance. So when you were talking about how to address that, and especially that information is being given out to the younger generation, like minute by minute through social media and just scrolling endlessly. So I just thought that that was really interesting that you mentioned social media being a huge contributor. And obviously for like the negative aspects, the good always, kind of outweighs it in some ways, like sharing that information, especially through period sharing those resources online, that also plays a big part. And that leads me to my next question, which is why should people become involved? And is this issue being given enough importance given, the number of platforms we have today and the number of work that's being done across the nation and, internationally as well? And how do you think that the advocacy of this bias can be integrated into society so that it can be normalized and not just make it, this is a seminar that's happening this month, make sure you attend it, or there's a period national action day that you should, be aware of. How do we normalize it so it's integrated into our daily lifestyles?
Yeah, I definitely think for people, they should get involved. One, kind of like I mentioned before, but I think menstrual equity really is a fundamental human rights issue that impacts half the population. I mean, it's one of our sustainable development goals for gender equality.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of that, of it being more integrated into society, I think it starts like while awareness is growing, I think it starts obviously with just advocacy into society by starting with like a friend family member, it'll slowly go to a workplace, schools, and government. I
Mhm.
think ignoring the fact that it's not policy is not really a thing because Period Inc. itself is all about policy. Like just by,
Right.
sharing curriculum and everything, that's great and it's going to educate a lot of people, but it needs to get to a certain point where those small actions can kind of lead to bigger things.
Right.
There's policies. I think in 2024 we had one of the most policies that have come out and that have been addressed in terms of like taxing menstrual products, having period products in schools, having period products in prisons, even acknowledging in documents that it's not just period products, it also consists of like sanitation, and it consists of waste management, it consists of a lot of other things,
Yeah.
or even addressing the fact that it's not just called like um like being very, I think it's being very particular with language. I think that they try to
Yeah.
get around saying that, okay, we're gonna have this many period products, but it's like, okay, we also need this or we also need that. So I think
Yeah.
it takes growing. It takes a lot of time. I
Yeah.
do think that we've made a lot of progress. I mean, we have more advertisements now. I'm not sure if you're familiar with I don't even know how many years ago, but there was a whole issue before with Rupi Kaur posting like an online image of like real period blood
Yeah.
on
Yes. Yes.
Instagram. And that was like a huge thing. Everyone was like, oh my God, there's now we see periods and advertisements. And there's a lot of new like up and coming younger generations that have like advertisements. So they post on their social media. Even TikTok now, people are like, get this period product. I've just seen the Aura ring that came out that's like on tracks your menstrual cycle and it tracks your hygiene. So I think
Yeah.
all those little things are more like company based, but now I think a lot of other organizations see how important it is and how much people value it. So I think to a government level, I think it's become more important because people are like,
Yeah.
okay, these companies value it. They think it's super important. A lot of young people are buying this kind of stuff. People don't want to, have PMS symptoms. They don't want to go through this. There's a lot of conversations that people don't have on menopause. Like it's even a huge age gap thing, which I think is really important. And that's kind of how it's growing. So I think just starting from that like granular level of like just your close friends, and then if you really want to start having more open conversations, you can start donating supplies, you could advocate for inclusive policies, and that'll slowly lead to more systemic change, which I'm hoping by some point in some year we'll be able to finally just say all states don't tax menstrual products and we don't have the tampon tax and everything.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think, like you said, it's like those little changes that you see, especially when you work your way up to policy. And I know that a lot of people themselves are not educated enough about, tampon taxes and things like that affect, how we buy our menstrual products and things like that, especially having menstrual products available in school. Those policies, you may not be aware of them, but once they do change, that starts to integrate into your daily lifestyle. Like, oh, it's more accessible for me to buy pads now, or my school has a box of pads or tampons in the bathroom. Like, I don't need to worry if I'm on my period. So I think, that advocacy work at the government level really affects people's lives at a minuscule scale, but that just becomes part of their daily lifestyle. And I really like how you mentioned Rupi Kaur's Instagram photo of her just in the bed, and you could see that she was on her period. And I was like, when I first saw that, I was like, wow, like I could, like, that was me, like literally 2 days ago. Like I could, resonate with that because and it was just displayed at such a raw level that, there was no filter about it. There was no trying to hide anything. It was just real. And I think if we just continue to do that type of work to be ourselves and just to be real about the issue, then, slowly, like you said, that granular change will start becoming even bigger. And obviously, Period has done so much work, especially in 2024. I think a lot of the policies have been, combated. I think they've become, even more stronger in the sense that it's just become more aware for our community that we have these resources and that it just takes us to make that change. So thank you so much for, being part of the change and for encouraging everyone else to be part of the change. And, like to end our podcast off, I wanted to ask you, what was that one moment at Period or in your life throughout your advocacy journey that gave you that conviction that, yeah, this is a cause that's worth fighting for? This was, what I was meant to be a part of. Like, what gave you that conviction?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot, but I guess one that comes to mind, I don't want to make it super long, but
No, you're
I
good.
guess one standout experience that came to mind for me, which is very much out of my comfort zone, which is what I was saying before, was partnering with two organizations, one called Girl Up Initiative Uganda and another called With Women Kisoboka, which basically just means with women it is possible. And there were two organizations that reached out to us, and basically they just wanted to promote the Sustainable Development Goals of gender equality and decent work and economic growth. And we were basically collaborating because we wanted to train women across Ugandan reproductive health and reusable pad production. And they were were looking for us because they needed resources. A lot of the materials that they wanted for this project weren't there in store, so we had to ship them. They also needed some funds to get it going. I was very unfamiliar because I've never really made reusable pads before. I've thought about it, but I've never used cloth pads. So I had to do a lot of my own research in terms of like how are these made? How are we have to make sure that they're safe and they're healthy and it's a
Yeah.
very simple product, so it doesn't have to be something that's using like plastic and everything like that.
Yeah.
But it was just simple, but it was also like really important. And I was really honored that they reached out to us specifically in our chapter and that they wanted us to be involved. So I think it took maybe 6 to 8 months, but we worked a lot on it. And we were able to train 35 women across 5 Ugandan communities to make and sell reusable cloth pads, really to promote economic independence. I wanted the project not to be something that was like a drop and go where we just kind of
Yeah.
sent products, we sent material, and then they had it for a month or they had it for 2 months. And then we were like, okay, bye. Like that was it. We didn't have anything else that we wanted to do with it. Um,
Yeah.
we really wanted to make sure that we were involved, which was a really important aspect for us, was making sure that the women were trained and they were able to kind of keep the program going. So we worked on the tailoring cooperatives, we worked on creating sustainable income opportunities. And after that, we produced over 300 reusable cloth pads. I think our goal originally was 500, and then they were still running after that. So we still have more time, and they're still running now to
Yeah.
really
That's
direct
crazy.
the yeah, to really direct the urgent need for affordable menstrual products because they just don't have all the material there.
Mhm.
And we even, I think they took some of the funds. They were also able to fund school fees for girls who were on their period.
Wow.
They were able to use the period products themselves. So it was a lot of different things. It was very new for me, but we had a lot of opportunity to work with them. I had a close relationship with one of the founders of their partner organization who was actually hosted in Massachusetts. So we also had kind of that US connection just to make sure that
Yeah.
everything was being distributed properly and make sure that it worked out. So just from that experience, I think that it was really great because one of the women who we worked with who was on the ground who was working there shared how the women in the communities didn't have their own means of income and they wanted
Okay.
to learn how to make reusable pads. So they were able to secure products for their family. They began selling them. So stories like hers really reaffirmed the belief that menstrual products and equity is just not about the product itself, but it's about, like I said, empowerment and breaking the cycle of period poverty. So just
Yeah.
seeing people able to like gain confidence and just hope for their future really, I guess, solidified my conviction then that I was like, okay, this is really great. We really completed a really great project. I want to still be involved. And I felt like, okay, now I feel that I can actually do this and that I want to continue because I didn't see that it was only in
Yeah.
my community, but I was like, I can really do a lot of things with this and I can work with a lot of different people. So just having that opportunity, I think I was like, that was great. And I want to keep doing the work I do. And, I didn't even think now that I would still be
Yeah.
working on, I mean, I always wanted to work with period, but I didn't know if it would be possible while I was still in school. So I think it's great that I'm going on 4 years now and I'm gonna
Wow.
keep going. So I think it's a really great opportunity to be involved with period because amazing work, amazing staff. The executive director I recently met with before I came back home from school, and she's Michaela. She's such a great lady and just super helpful with everything. So I think just the staff itself is like super close and really wants people to get involved as much as they can. So I think that's also the kind of love that I receive that you also want to give back to the people that you see.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing your story. And when you were talking about creating a reusable pad, it just reminded me of in eighth grade, we had a science project. It was like for the science fair, you either create an innovation or you reiterate an innovation. So when everyone was doing, like motorcycles and like, I mean, remote cars and, like all of the cool, like STEM based electronic stuff, I was like, let's reiterate the pad. Let's create a cloth pad. So when I tried to like, create my own version of a cloth pad that's sustainable and that can be like accessible to like people in third world countries, and I presented it, I could always I could already hear like the guys snickering in the back, and like, people not really taking it seriously. And like my teacher was also like, okay, like I don't really know about this one. Like, it's not like I don't know if this is considered like a science project, which was kind of ironic because, it's about the human body and everything, but it just reminded me of like, something that really started my interest in this area. So thank you for sharing your story. And that wraps up today's episode. Thank you, Laila, for your insight on how we can combat period poverty and normalize the flow, literally. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And remember, don't just go with the flow, change it. Together, let's make menstruation a conversation, not a stigma. See you soon. Thank you so much.